Boom. One thing that I did not cover that I wanted to cover that I said wrong was, and one of those whole tangents about divine, that what is true is that I don't like to speak about the divine within arguments. But to go further, I define divine or divinity as things that transcend. I haven't gone deep enough into that thought to defend it. So that's why I don't like to bring it up. I don't know if I made that super clear in the last lesson. So I don't like to use it within arguments because somebody would say, well, what is divinity? And I would say something that transcends things is so general that it's easy to attack that premise. I think that's a sufficient review. We also went over the Matrix a little bit, but I'm saving an even deeper dive on the matrix for the abstract because the abstract is also a matrix. So I'm saving a bit of more of that, but I went over the Great Mother and the Devouring Mother and how they work within each other. So, all right, so let's dive into this. This is like a pre-class for consciousness. So I have to go over this before we get into consciousness or what people call the Great Father, the Divine Masculine, all these other names that people will give it. So we're going to have to start here first. So I'm very excited about this. Let's get going. I did have AI create this presentation out of my notes. So hopefully AI is treating me well today and not butchering my entire presentation. So, all right. So matter spell lesson 3, exploring consciousness, matter in modern physics. So consciousness in the brain, consciousness, and we're going to circle back to this. So remember this. Consciousness is not inside your brain is inside your consciousness. Say that again. Your consciousness is not inside your brain is inside your consciousness. So matter and its properties. We can measure aspects of matter, mass, charge, spin, but we have no idea what matter actually is. Physics only provides descriptions of behavior or relationships between measurable properties, not the essence of the stuff itself. So physics, so the philosophy of order, abstract exploration, the reason why I can't even call what we do a science is because science is literally detached from essence. Materialism is detached from essence. Science, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but science is about predicting what nature is going to do next. Matter is a description of what we're dealing with here in this realm that we call the 3D space. So they're neither one are concerned about the essence of something. And I am. And if you're spiritual, you probably are. So let's go deeper. Maps and abstractions, scientific descriptions, equations, graphs, models are abstractions. They're maps. They capture behaviors, relationships, and prediction, but not the thing itself. We have become so dependent on the maps that we confuse them for reality itself. Let me give you all an example. And I didn't come up with this example, but I love it. Let's say that we were on a journey in the mountains in the forest, and we have a map, right? And we're looking at this map, and there are things on the map that are clearly wrong. And so let's say Jules says, I think we should go this way because there's things on this map that don't accurately represent where we are. But then let's say Obadiah says, no, that doesn't make any sense. The map says it's this way, so we're going to follow the map. People do this all the time. The problem is, and scientists do this, they're confusing the map for reality itself. The map just helps us picture reality. It just helps us see it in a way that we can understand it. It is not the space itself. So we cannot pretend as if the map has more precedence than what we are actually experiencing in reality. And this is what we do in science pretty often. But only because science right now is trapped in materialism. Right now, people are starting to break free, but that's what's going on. All right, so qualia and the hard problem. So qualia is like a philosophical terminology. Qualia is like colors, sounds, smells, feelings are the most immediate and undeniable elements of experience. So you can't get away from this in your experience in your everyday life. You're going to see colors, you're going to hear sounds, you're going to smell things, you're going to feel things. This is what we call the qualia. Materialism explains brain activity, but not why that activity feels like something. So this is the problem. This is called the hard problem of consciousness. Why does physical processing give rise to experience? Materialism has no answer because qualities cannot be reduced to quantities being physical things. So to put it in another way, matter of fact, I don't want to go ahead of myself because these slides are going to explain that. Appearance versus essence. What we see and measure, appearance, may not correspond to what something is, the essence. Materialism assumes appearance is essence, a fundamental error. I would argue personally, the appearance of something tells you about the essence, but is not the essence itself. We spoke about this in the philosophy of order group. I brought that up because this is what we were going to be talking about. Normally, when I put things like that in chat, just know that we're probably going to be visiting that in great detail here in the course. So, for example, when you look at somebody obese, there's a lot morbidly obese, I should say, because technically right now I weigh about 165. If I weigh about 170, I am scientifically categorized as obese due to my body weight ratio. So let's use the term morbidly obese, right? So when somebody is morbidly obese, you can look at them and based on this physical manifestation, you can see certain attributes about their essence, right? I can see their spirit through that because your physical self is a manifestation of that essence. But with that being said, that does not mean that you right now are your core essence because you collect other attributes as you go through life. So, as you are now physically represented, it's showing me a great deal of your essence, but we shouldn't confuse the way you look, your physicality, your entire body for your essence itself. So, for example, when I look at somebody who's morbidly obese, I can tell you a couple things. I can tell you that they have the spirit in them of a lack of self-control. I can tell they have probably the spirit of a family curse. They're passing these things on. I can tell you that they have spirit of consumerism or the attribute. I could tell you so many things, right? Somebody can look at my hand right now. Some of y'all may know the science, some of you may not. How, people say, I could tell your future by looking at your hand. This is actually from a old true science. A lot of the people who do it now is a bunch of fictitious nonsense, but it's from a true science in which by looking at your hands, there are certain gives that it tells me about your life. Same thing with your eyeball. There are scientists that can look at your eyeball and tell you a lot about your health. And so in that same way, so my finger, they'll go, Elohim's middle finger is longer than his index. And anybody can look this up. This would mean that when he was in adolescence, he got a very huge boost of testosterone. This also means, due to that, he probably had a lot of issues going through high school. He probably had a couple acts of fights and some rebellions with teacher, and they can make predictions based off of this one little thing about your physical body. And so that's what I mean by your physical body gives, it tells you things about your spirit that you may not know. And so because your spirit is manifesting on the outside as your body, and when we look at it, but with all that being said, we still cannot confuse the way you look right now with your actual spirit and essence. And materialism makes this problem all the time. They assume because the planet Earth looks like a ball to us. Oh, I shouldn't use this because then you're going to think about flat Earth and stuff like that. So I'm going to use a different example. So we think because the sun looks like a ball of light to us, that it is a ball of light. But we understand that it's not actually a ball of light. There's things like there's gases. There's so much to the sun. But the confusion is that we look at something and by its appearance, we believe that we know essentially what it is. No, you have some hints, you have some clues to what it is, but it's just the appearance, it's not the essence itself. So materialism commits the reification fallacy, turning abstract models into assumed essences, mistaking equations for the nature of existence. Just because you have the equation of something, M equals MC squared. That is just an equation. That is not reality itself. It is a good way for us to understand reality itself. It is a map of reality, but it is not reality itself. You cannot confuse the two. There are equations that really help us map the world, understand if we do this and this happens. but those are not the same thing as the world itself. This is why when we talk about abstract history, I never say Yahweh is good based on biblical text. I never say that Yahweh is evil based on Gnostic text. We are looking at maps of Yahweh. These are maps. These are mythologies, are maps of spirits. They're just people trying to tell you what they understand about the spirit in question. It's not the spirit itself. When you're reading the Bible, you're not reading Yahweh itself. When you're reading the Gnostic literature, you're not reading Yahweh itself. You're reading a map of Yahweh. In that same way, when you see equations in science, people think the laws of physics is physics. The laws of physics is not physics itself. It is a map of reality and a map of the physical world. There's a huge difference, and this has to be understood. So where did materialism come from? This is where we break the spell right here. For anybody who's still hanging on to materialism in their brains and in their minds. Materialism didn't arise from scientific breakthroughs, but from a socio-political pressure. Early scientists needed protection from the church. Anybody can look this up, which had ideological power but no military force. To avoid persecution, they created an artificial divide. Physics deals with matter, the church deals with soul, spirit, or what they call psyche. We're going to deal with physics, the church is going to deal with the psyche. In that way, the church doesn't get mad at us when we deal with things of the spirit. Originally, scientists wanted to deal with, they call it the spirit at the time, or the psyche, or the soul, which were non-material things. But the church would fund your scientific projects because they funded everything, or they would outright kill you. So they were like, you know what? We need to stay away from that. So let's just focus on physics. Let's not focus on anything immaterial. Over centuries, this defensive strategy of survival hardened into a metaphysical belief, even though Enlightenment founders did not believe strict materialism was true. This happens in history all the time, y'all. I can't tell you how many times that people accidentally start believing in something that was never meant to be believed in. And then they run with it. And then it becomes a part of our paradigm. That's where we're at right now. So, where people truly believe that materialism is reality and don't even understand the origins of the ideology of materialism. It's very easy to interact with the world when you understand that everything are just ideologies. It's harder to challenge things when you think that things are immovable laws. One of the first things you learn in philosophies is that all these isms are just philosophies. They can be challenged. They are not, and the word law makes it seem like for some reason it cannot be challenged. Laws are challenged all the time. For something to become a law, it just means that it's so predictable. It works so well with predicting nature that is a law of nature. But it doesn't mean that there's not something still wrong with the law, that we need to tweak it, make it a little better, make it a little, change some things about it. By the way, that is what science is about. There are plenty of laws that we have that change over time. But one of the things even further are ideologies. So materialism, though, is something that we all, but most of us believe in, it doesn't even come from a scientific stance. And it comes from a fear of the church. And I could go on how much church influenced early science. And it's how much it still affects our perceptions of things today. But that goes even deeper into Yahwehism. So, qualitative states and materialism. The only data we ever have are qualitative states. Sensations, perceptions, experiences. Materialism cannot explain any let me first explain that. What that means is, because I don't want to lose anybody, there is nothing but experience. This goes back to what I said about existence, right? When I said, well, what is the opposition to non-existence? What is the opposition to something? Nothing. What is the opposition to experiencing? Unconsciousness. So how could you experience something outside of consciousness? How could you possibly experience something outside of consciousness? It doesn't make sense. Materialism cannot explain any qualitative state. It merely asserts that matter produces experiences, but offers no mechanism for it. Thus, materialism explains none of the given data of consciousness. Instead, it explains only its own assumptions, making the worldview circular, inconsistent, and at odds with physics and neuroscience. Two realms. Hold up, somebody's trying to come in. Jessita. Does anybody know who Jessita is? Oh, the baby's on. Does anybody know who Jessita is? No? I'm gonna let Jessita in and see what's going on. Jessita!
No.
Jessita!
Yes,
Hey, how are you? Are you here for the Philosophy of Order course?
yes. Sure.
Awesome. So it's okay if you haven't. I decided when people try to come, I'm gonna let them come in for one at least. To be in here, you're supposed to be read in the different books. Have you read any of the books like Tham's Where We're Gods, the first book, the second book?
I have not. I have one of them on audiobook that I had listened to a few days ago, but I have not gotten into it yet.
So you could go ahead and sit in and listen. We're going to go real deep dive into this stuff though, so I'm just going to give you a warning. We're going really deep into this.
Sure, no problem.
All right,
So
but
I'm
next
sorry,
time,
I wasn't
but
supposed to
we'll,
be
we'll be
here.
doing this next week. I want you here next week, but just make sure you read all, go through all the content on all. You can do it all on Audible. So just go through all the content, and so
Oh,
I'm here, you're caught up.
no problem.
Awesome. All right, so apologies, I accidentally asked you to unmute. So, two realms in political invention. So, the church exerted immense power through ideology rather than armies. Early science needed a domain that wouldn't threaten, I went ahead of myself, apologies, y'all, but I'll just re explain that wouldn't threaten church authority. So, they created two realms: physics, safe, material, external, psyche, dangerous, spiritual, church controlled. So, anything in psyche or soul or spirit, that's what psyche originally meant, they said, we're not going to touch that because the church is going to persecute us. They're going to defund us. They're going to try to murder us. So we're not going to talk about that. We'll only talk about physical things. But again, people forgot. And so people started to believe that is what science was. Newton and gravity. Newton brilliantly described gravity mathematically, but openly admitted he had no idea what gravity actually is. So I'm giving that example to show y'all the mass difference between Newton theory and him actually understanding what gravity is. Just because we map out the human body does not mean we know how the human body works. You understand? It doesn't mean that we know what the human body is. So what he's saying is, no, I describe gravity completely mathematically to the point where I can predict what's going to happen. I still don't know what gravity is. I have no idea what it is. And a lot of scientists have to deal with this. And they tell philosophers like me and that, oh my God, stop asking why and the essence and what it is. Just look, we just know how it works. That's what matters. That's their way of gaslighting people away from the fact that they're ignorant in the topic of essence, what the philosophy of order is concerned with. So quantities versus qualities. Physics gradually came to treat only quantities as real, dismissing qualities as secondary mental tricks. Modern culture treats qualities as epiphenomena, which is accidental byproducts of the brain with no real explanatory role. Explanatory role. Qualities are the only things we have direct access to, though. Yet materialism acts as if they're unreal, mere neural tricks. So let me break that down what that means because I don't want to. So qualities, remember qualities as colors, that's taste, that's sight, that's experience. Quantities are physical things, material things. So modern culture scientists want to convince y'all that everything is these qualities are epiphenomena. They're just acting byproducts of the brain. I've always had an issue with this. Me and my favorite professor in the University of Lincoln University had a big debate about this, and we stopped the entire class to debate this. He made the assertion that everything that happens in the mind is just fake. I said, why are you saying that? Where does that come from? He said, well, your dreams are fake. Your dreams are just something that's happening in the brain. And I asked him, I said, well, can you locate where the Tyrannosaurus Rex and my dream is in my brain? Can you find it for me? Because I don't know if you will be able to find it. I think you can open up my brain right now and you still will not be able to find a Tyrannosaurus Rex that's in my brain. This is an issue. Where did I go when I went to sleep last night when I dreamt? Your mind just made it up. Even if my mind made it all up, what makes that unreal? Because my mind made it up? Why is the assumption that whatever my mind creates is therefore fake? Where does this assumption come from? Big problem. And the reality is that materials, they can't explain that. So what they really mean is we can't explain this thing, so we're just going to call it fake. And I'm not exaggerating this. I'm not exaggerating their position. This is the material's position. We cannot explain the qualities. So therefore, let's just call it fake so we don't got to deal with it anymore. All right? So the mapping problem, let's revisit this. Why does a blue light yield the experience of blue instead of the taste of a hamburger? Weird question, but I want y'all to think about that. Why, when we see the blue light, does it yield the color blue and not a taste of hamburger? When we see blue, do we not taste blue when we see it? Why does that happen? Why, even though they're less than 1% of the population, why when some people hear music, they see colors and symbols? Why does that happen?
Hmm.
What's happening?
Right.
Right? So materialism can only point to correlations. They'll say blue light, neural pattern, experience. But they cannot explain why certain neural processes produce certain sensations. This is called the mapping problem. In consciousness, the mapping is arbitrary and unexplained under materialism. The arbitrary mapping between physical processes and subjective experience reveals a deep explanatory gap. I keep saying it wrong. Correlation is not explanation. So, in other words, just because I can correlate something, you see the blue light, and then the neural pattern for blue light pops up, and then you get the experience of blue light. That is mapping. You're not telling me A, what the blue light is, why I am seeing blue light instead of pink light, instead of taste of hamburger. So you're mapping. You're not actually explaining reality. And you're explaining a correlation. We know that blue light correlates to neural pattern, correlates to experience, but we cannot explain why that is. So appearances versus reality. Physical properties we detect, mass, charge, extinction, geometry, temperature, are all how something appears to us, not what the thing is in itself. Just because we have a detailed description of something doesn't mean the description is the real thing. It is just a description, just a model in our minds. In this case, all the time when we talk about, again, the gods. So people say, I've seen the gods. So when ancient people saw Yahweh, they saw Yahweh with a horn dress, with jewels on his neck, muscles, with sandals on, and a sword or a spear, or sometimes a bow and arrow. If somebody sees Yahweh today, they're probably going to see an old European man with a long white beard and a white shroud, some sandals. So my point to you is that neither one is Yahweh. They're what your mind is doing the best it can do to give you the symbols of what you're seeing in a way that you can understand said spirit or essence. That is what your mind, when you see me right now, that is the best that your mind could possibly do to represent the essence of Elohim. And the same thing is going on in reality. So modern physics and matter. So contemporary physics, quantum field theory, and relativity has invalidated classical materialism. So the issue that materialism is having is with quantum theory right now. In other words, there are no tiny billiard ball particles. Matter is modeled as excitation of fields, probability, amplitudes, relational structures, and mathematical symmetries. All right. So I'm just going to briefly explain all these. I am elementary in understanding quantum physics, y'all. So I just want to tell you. But I am going to explain these as best as I can because they are important. So an excitation field is are disturbances or waves in fields fundamental to modern physics, representing what we perceive as particles. So let me explain this. Particles are not real, y'all. When you hear in science about a particle, they say, "Oh, we got a particle." That is a metaphor that they use. It's like a drawing they use to get people to understand something. And we say he when we describe the Most High, or she when we describe the Matrix. This is just the best way for us to explain to you what we're talking about. In that same way, a particle, it's a horrible way to explain it. What a particle truly is, imagine reality like an ocean, and then you have a wave come out of the ocean back into the ocean. That is what a particle is. So scientists were originally saying at the smallest level, even smaller than the atom, you get particles. But physical particles don't exist. There's waves. Things are coming out into being, and we found this out with quantum physics. Then you have probability amplitudes, complex numbers in quantum mechanics, whose squared magnitude gives the probability of a specific outcome. Relational structures, ways to define relationships between elements of a set, with examples like relational databases and graphs. Mathematical symmetry. So symmetry describes how an object remains invariant under transformations like reflection or rotation. I don't know, there's some shapes that you can reflect, that you can turn, but it will always look exactly the same. And so we're finding out that at the most smallest level of physical things, that this is what we're seeing instead of what we expected. So why materialism is outdated? Materialism imagines stuff as solid matter, contradicting the actual findings of modern science. Physicalism is a folk belief that accidentally survived the scientific revolution that should have killed it. Modern science shows the world isn't made of tiny solid balls. It works very differently. Quantum and relativistic physics show matter lacks the solid intrinsic features materialism assumes. Physical entities behave more like mathematical relationships rather than stuff. Fundamental objects are abstract structures, not physical substances. This is coming down to. So, people like us, the abstract explorers, this is a good time because abstract reality is starting to be more seen as a reality and not just a philosophical masturbation anymore. So, consciousness is foundational. I'll just read first. Consciousness is epistemistic. So, anytime you see the word epistemology, it just means the study of knowledge. So, I realize I didn't explain that. Foundational, every measurement, observation, equation, or model is experienced in consciousness. Therefore, consciousness cannot be secondary, derived, or dependent on an external material world. Let me say that again. Therefore, consciousness cannot be secondary, derived, or dependent on an external world. Let's go back. Every measurement, equation, or model is experienced in consciousness. Therefore, consciousness cannot be secondary, derived, or dependent on an external material world. Materialism attempts to explain the undeniable consciousness using speculative matter. This is backwards. So all we ever observe of a brain is a set of colors, shapes, textures, and sensations and conscious experience. Therefore, the brain, what we are calling the brain, cannot be outside consciousness. It is one of consciousness' own appearances. So our next class will focus specifically on consciousness rather than materialism. I just wanted to get us as far out of materialism as possible. So, because when we go into consciousness, it's going to get really weird. It's going to get really deep. It's going to get really strange. When we speak of the all or the womb, we aren't talking about materialism. Because when I talk about these things, people think about physical things. We're exploring the foundations that give rise to material things. After consciousness, we'll dive into the abstract, exploring the omniverse and how all things arise from possibility and substantiality. I include this material to explain why consciousness is fundamental. We'll go even deeper next time. So I'm going to give y'all a link in the group me to a podcast. Literally, when I first came up with this presentation, I was just having such a difficult time with how I wanted to attack materialism. So I was watching a bunch of podcasts on materialism, and I found this brilliant podcast with this great scientist. I don't agree with everything he says. He's an analytical idealist, and I'm not, but I agree with his take on materialism. And so most of this presentation was borrowed. Now, if you watch it and you don't remember this explanation, it's going to, you'll probably get lost listening to it unless you're very familiar with physics, quantum physics, and these terminologies. But I will send it to y'all to go through it because it's very similar to what I just went over today, extremely similar. And now I'm going to stop recording.